Hey folks, I'm excited to share some stories with you today that I've written myself. Whether you're a long-time follower or just joining us, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you're new here. Let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. I am a dark web hitman. I was hired to kill a killer clown. Later on, I found out that was my brother. I've done some terrible things in my life, but nothing prepared me for the job that would shatter my entire world. My name's Max, and I've been a hitman for hire on the dark web for almost a decade now. I'm not proud of it, but it pays the bills and keeps me off the streets. You don't ask questions in this line of work. You take the job, you get it done, and you move on. But this job was different from the start. It was a late Thursday night when the email came in. I was in my dingy apartment, sipping on some cheap whiskey, scrolling through my usual forums when I saw it. The request was simple: take out a killer clown. Now, I've had my fair share of weird gigs, from stalking obsessed ex-lovers to silencing corporate snitches. But a clown? It sounded almost comical. Almost. The client was anonymous, as usual, but the money was too good to pass up. $50,000 up front, another $50,000 after the job was done. They provided me with an address and a grainy photo. The clown's face was painted in garish colors, eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked more deranged than anything else. The address was in some rundown part of town I'd never heard of, which wasn't uncommon for these kinds of jobs. I started my prep work immediately, dug around for any information on this killer clown. Turns out, he was a local urban legend. Parents would scare their kids with tales of Chuckles, the maniac who kidnapped and murdered children. Just your typical boogeyman story, right? Except there were actual missing person reports that matched the timeline of the legend. Shit got real when I found news clippings about kids found dead, mutilated, with pieces missing. My stomach churned as I read about the sick details, how their faces were left in permanent, twisted smiles. It was a job that needed doing, no doubt. But as I delved deeper, I felt something nagging at the back of my mind. Something familiar about the whole thing. Shaking it off, I geared up. Gun, knife, gloves, the usual. I headed out around midnight, driving through deserted streets until I reached the address. The house was a decrepit old thing, barely standing, paint peeling, windows boarded up, the kind of place that kids dare each other to go into on Halloween. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay. I crept around the side, looking for a way in. I found an unlocked window and slipped inside. The place was a nightmare. Dust and cobwebs everywhere, the stench of mold and something far worse permeating the air. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I could hear faint, eerie music playing somewhere in the house. It was one of those old-fashioned carnival tunes, the kind that made your skin crawl. I followed the music to the basement door. The handle was cold and sticky. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, each step echoing in the dark. The basement was dimly lit, flickering bulbs casting long shadows. And there, in the center of the room, was Chuckles. He was hunched over a makeshift workbench, surrounded by knives, saws, and other tools of torture. The walls were covered in grotesque drawings and photographs of his victims. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him work. He was singing softly to himself, a chilling, off-key rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel. I approached slowly, pulling my gun from its holster. Just as I was about to take the shot, he turned around. Our eyes met, and I felt a jolt of recognition. He smiled, a twisted grin spreading across his painted face. "Maxie," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "Long time no see." My blood ran cold. Only one person ever called me Maxie. My brother, Tom. The brother I hadn't seen in over 15 years. The brother who disappeared without a trace when we were kids. I lowered my gun, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. Chuckles tilted his head, watching me with those crazed eyes. "Surprised to see me?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You left me behind, Maxie. You let them take me." Memories came flooding back. The night Tom vanished, the arguments with our parents, the guilt that had haunted me ever since. But how could this be him? How could my brother be this monster? "Tom," I managed to choke out. "What happened to you?" He laughed, a horrible, guttural sound. "They took me, Maxie. They showed me the truth. And now, I'm going to show it to you." Before I could react, he lunged at me, knife in hand. I barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing my arm. Pain seared through me, but I fought back, grappling with him. We struggled, the basement filling with the sounds of our grunts and the clatter of tools. Tom was strong, too strong. His eyes were wild, his strength fueled by madness. He slashed at me again, and I felt the cold steel bite into my flesh. Desperation gave me strength. I grabbed a nearby hammer and swung it at his head. The impact sent him staggering back, and I didn't hesitate. I tackled him to the ground, pinning him beneath me. "Tom!" I shouted, hoping to reach whatever was left of my brother. "Stop this. It's me, Max." He laughed again, blood trickling from his mouth. "It's too late, Maxie. Too late for both of us." With a final, desperate effort, I brought the hammer down on his skull. The sickening crunch echoed in the basement, and he went limp beneath me. I sat there panting, blood soaking my clothes. I looked down at my brother's lifeless body, my mind numb. I killed him. I killed my brother. As I sat there, the full horror of what I'd done began to sink in. The killer clown was my brother, and now he was dead by my hand. The job was done, but the price was far too high. I had so many questions, but no one left to answer them. I stumbled out of the basement, my body aching, my mind in a haze. I made it back to my car and drove away, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that my life would never be the same. That night, I became the very thing I hunted, and the darkness that took my brother now threatened to consume me as well. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom's face, his twisted grin, the madness in his eyes. I spent the next few days in a fog, barely eating or drinking. The weight of what I had done gnawed at me, a constant, suffocating presence. I needed answers. I needed to know how my brother, my Tom, had turned into Chuckles the Clown. I started digging through old records, news articles, anything I could find about his disappearance. The police had never found any leads, and our parents had died years ago, still not knowing what happened to him. I visited our old neighborhood, hoping to jog some memories or find someone who remembered us. Most of the houses were empty now, boarded up and forgotten, but there was one person still living there, old Mrs. Henderson. She had been our neighbor, and she always kept an eye on us kids. Her house was in better shape than the others, though the yard was overgrown and the paint was peeling. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments she answered. She was older, frailer, but her eyes were sharp and suspicious. "Max," she said, squinting at me. "Is that you?" "Yeah, Mrs. Henderson." "It's me," I replied, forcing a smile. "I was hoping to ask you some questions about Tom." Her expression darkened, and she stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the house was cluttered with knickknacks and old furniture, the smell of must and lavender hanging in the air. She led me to the living room and motioned for me to sit. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said, settling into an old armchair, "especially after what happened." I swallowed hard, the memories flooding back. "I need to know what you remember about that night, Mrs. Henderson. Anything you can tell me." She sighed, her eyes distant. "It was so long ago, Max, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Tom was a sweet boy, but there was always something different about him. After your parents started fighting, he became more withdrawn. I tried to reach out, but he wouldn't talk to me." She paused, her hands trembling. "That night, I heard a commotion outside. When I looked out the window, I saw a van parked in front of your house. 2 men were dragging Tom away. He was kicking and screaming, but they overpowered him and shoved him into the van. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the van was gone. They never found it. I felt a lump in my throat, the horror of that night hitting me all over again." "Did you ever see those men again?" She shook her head. "No, but there were rumors. People said there was a group, a cult that took children. They believed in some twisted form of enlightenment through suffering. I always feared they got Tom." My stomach turned. "A cult? Do you know where they might have taken him?" Mrs. Henderson frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. "There was a talk of an old abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of the town. People said strange things happened there, that it was a front for their activities. Maybe you'll find some answers there." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. An amusement park. It made a twisted kind of sense. Clowns, kids, the perfect cover for something sinister. I drove out to the edge of town, the landscape growing more desolate with every mile. Eventually, I saw it, the rusted gates of an old amusement park, half hidden by overgrown weeds and trees. The place was a ghost town, the rides and attractions long abandoned and decayed. I climbed over the fence and made my way inside, the eerie silence pressing down on me. I explored the grounds, searching for any sign of what happened to Tom. The Ferris wheel loomed overhead, its once bright colors faded and peeling. The merry-go-round was frozen in time, the painted horses chipped and broken. As I wandered deeper into the park, I found a small building with a faded sign that read, "Fun House." The door was ajar, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped inside. The interior was dark and claustrophobic, mirrors lining the walls and distorting my reflection. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. At the back of the funhouse, I found a hidden door, partially concealed by a tattered curtain. I pushed it open and descended a narrow staircase. The air grew colder, and I could hear faint whispers, like the echoes of long-forgotten screams. The stairs led to a large underground chamber, lit by flickering candles. In the center of the room was an altar, surrounded by strange symbols and old blood-stained tools. The walls were covered in photographs, children's faces twisted in terror, their eyes pleading. Among them, I saw Tom. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was where they took him. This was where they broke him. My head spun. a mix of rage and sorrow overwhelming me. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, but stopped when I saw a figure standing in the shadows. "Maxie," the figure whispered, stepping into the light. It was Tom, or at least the ghost of him. He looked the same as he did when he disappeared, but his eyes were hollow, empty. "Tom?" I choked out, my voice trembling. "You left me, Maxie," he said, his voice echoing around the chamber. "You let them take me, and now you'll pay." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm sorry, Tom. I tried to find you. I tried," but his expression remained cold, unfeeling. "It's too late, Maxie. Too late for apologies." Before I could react, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a hand on my shoulder, icy and relentless. I screamed, fighting to break free, but the grip tightened. I was pulled into the darkness, the whispers growing louder, deafening. When I finally woke, I was outside the park, lying in the dirt. My body ached, and my mind was a blur. I didn't know how I got there, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. The cult, the park, Tom's ghost. It was all connected, and I had to find the truth, no matter the cost. I dragged myself to my car, the sun setting on the horizon. As I drove away, I knew one thing for certain. The darkness that took my brother was still out there, and it was coming for me next. The days that followed felt like a living nightmare. Sleep eluded me, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom's face, heard his accusing voice. My wounds from the fight with him were healing, but the psychological scars were far deeper. The revelation of the cult, the amusement park, and the underground chamber haunted my thoughts. I needed to dig deeper, find out who these people were and why they did what they did. I spent hours online, scouring forums and message boards for any mention of the cult. I came across whispers of a group called the Children of Euphoria, a twisted sect that believed in achieving enlightenment through suffering. Their victims were mostly children, taken and tortured to break their spirits. My blood boiled at the thought of what Tom must have endured at their hands. I had to find them. I had to make them pay, but I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to an old contact of mine, a private investigator named Lisa. She was one of the few people I trusted, and I knew she had resources I didn't. We met at a dingy bar on the outskirts of the town, the kind of place where people went to be forgotten. Lisa was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking as tough as ever. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her sharp blue eyes scanned the room before landing on me. "Max," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," I admitted, sliding into the booth across from her. "I need your help, Lisa. It's about Tom." Her expression softened. She knew about Tom's disappearance, and she'd helped me search for him back then. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The hit on the killer clown, discovering it was Tom, the cult, the amusement park. She listened intently, her eyes narrowing as I recounted my encounter with Tom's ghost. "Jesus, Max," she muttered, shaking her head. "You sure you're not losing it?" "I wish I was," I replied, my voice trembling. "But I saw him, Lisa, and I found their hideout. These people, they're real, and they need to be stopped." She nodded slowly, taking a sip of her beer. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up on these children of Euphoria, but you need to be careful. If they're as dangerous as you say, this won't be easy." "Thanks, Lisa. I owe you one," Just stay alive, Max. That's payment enough. The next few days were a blur of research and sleepless nights. Lisa came through with some information, a few names, locations, and a potential lead on where the cult might be operating now. They moved around frequently, never staying in one place for long. But there was a farmhouse on the outskirts of town that matched the pattern of their previous hideouts. I knew I had to check it out, but I couldn't go in blind. I spent hours staking out the place, watching for any signs of activity. The farmhouse was old and dilapidated, surrounded by overgrown fields and woods. There were no signs of life during the day, but at night I saw faint lights flickering in the windows. Someone was definitely there. I waited until the third night before making my move. Armed with my gun and a flashlight, I approached the farmhouse under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves and creak of the floorboards amplifying my anxiety. I found a side door that was slightly ajar and slipped inside. The interior was just as run down as the exterior, broken furniture, dust-covered surfaces, and an overwhelming smell of mold and decay. I moved cautiously, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. As I made my way through the house, I heard faint voices coming from the basement. I crept down the stairs, the voices growing louder. They were chanting, a low rhythmic murmur that sent chills down my spine. The basement was dimly lit, but I could make out a group of figures gathered around an altar similar to the one I had seen in the amusement park. They were wearing hooded robes, their faces obscured. I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as the leader, a tall, imposing figure, stepped forward. He began speaking in a language I didn't understand, his voice filled with fervor. The others responded in kind, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. As the ritual reached its peak, the leader pulled out a knife and approached a figure tied to a chair. My heart stopped when I realized it was a child, no older than 10. The kid was terrified, tears streaming down his face. The leader raised the knife and I knew I had to act. I stepped out of the shadows, gun raised. "Drop the knife," I shouted, my voice echoing in the basement. The chanting stopped abruptly, and all eyes turned to me. The leader hesitated, then sneered. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he spat. "I don't care," I growled. "Let the kid go, or I swear I'll put a bullet in your head." The leader chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You're too late, Max. The ritual is already in motion. The child's sacrifice will bring us closer to enlightenment." I didn't wait for him to finish. I fired, the shot ringing out in the confined space. The leader dropped to the ground, blood pooling around him. The other cult members scrambled, some fleeing, others trying to fight. I took down anyone who came at me, the adrenaline numbing my fear. In the chaos, I reached the child and untied him. "It's okay, kid. You're safe now," I said, trying to reassure him. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Thank you," he stammered. I got him out of the basement and out of the house, my heart pounding. As we made our way to my car, I felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching us. I glanced back and saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was Tom, his eyes hollow and accusing. "Maxie," his voice echoed in my mind. "It's not over." I shuddered, but I couldn't let fear stop me. I had to get the kid to safety and figure out my next move. As I drove away from the farmhouse, I knew one thing for sure. The fight against the cult was far from over, and I would do whatever it took to stop them. The kid's name was Danny. After getting him to safety and contacting the authorities anonymously, I knew I couldn't stick around. The cult would come looking for me, and I couldn't risk being caught. I had to stay on the move, but first, I needed to regroup and figure out my next steps. Lisa met me at a motel on the outskirts of town. I filled her in on what happened at the farmhouse, and she was as horrified as I was. We needed a plan to take these bastards down for good. She dug up more info, tracing the cult's activities and uncovering connections that led us to a name: James Delaney, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for philanthropy. Publicly, he was a pillar of the community. Privately, he was the leader of the children of Euphoria. Delaney owned a secluded mansion in the hills, a place where he held his twisted gatherings. We decided to gather as much evidence as we could before making a move. Lisa hacked into his private accounts, uncovering emails, financial transactions, and disturbing photos that linked him directly to the cult's activities. It was enough to put him away for life, but we needed more. We needed to catch him in the act. We devised a plan. Lisa would create a false identity for me, a new recruit eager to join the cult. It was risky, but it was the only way to get close to Delaney and gather the final pieces of evidence we needed. I shaved my head, changed my appearance, and assumed the identity of Mark Johnson, a troubled man seeking enlightenment through the cult's teachings. I attended one of their public events, a charity gala hosted at Delaney's mansion. The place was opulent, filled with the city's elite, all unaware of the horrors that took place behind closed doors. I mingled with the crowd, keeping a low profile while Lisa monitored from a distance. Eventually, I caught Delaney's eye, and he approached me with a charming smile. "Mark, isn't it?" he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Delaney. I hear you're interested in our work." "Yes, sir," I replied, shaking his hand. "I've heard a lot about the children of Euphoria. I'm intrigued by your philosophy." He smiled, his eyes cold and calculating. "We have a private gathering tonight, a more intimate setting. I think you'll find it enlightening. Why don't you join us?" I agreed, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, our chance to expose him. Later that night, I followed Delaney and a small group of cult members to a hidden room in the mansion. It was lavishly decorated, but the atmosphere was sinister. The air was thick with incense, and the walls were adorned with disturbing paintings and symbols. Delaney began the ritual, speaking in that same strange language I'd heard in the basement. The others responded in kind, their voices rising in a chilling chorus. He motioned for me to step forward, handing me a ceremonial dagger. "Prove your devotion, Mark," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Sacrifice your past self and be reborn in our light." I hesitated, the weight of the dagger heavy in my hand. I knew I had to play along, but the thought of what they expected me to do was nauseating. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising the dagger. But instead of turning it on myself, I lunged at Delaney. He was taken by surprise, but he quickly recovered, grabbing my wrist and twisting it painfully. The others rushed forward, but I fought them off, the room descending into chaos. In the struggle, I managed to get the upper hand, pinning Delaney to the ground. "You're finished," I growled, pressing the dagger to his throat. "We have everything we need to bring you down." His eyes widened in fear, but then he smiled, a slow, sinister grin. "You think you can stop us? We're everywhere, Max. You kill me, and another would take my place. The children of Euphoria will never die. Before I could react, the doors burst open and armed police officers flooded the room. Lisa had caught them in, timing their arrival perfectly. They rounded up the cult members, and Delaney was dragged away in handcuffs, his smile never fading. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. As I stood there, catching my breath, I saw Tom's ghostly figure standing in the corner, his expression unreadable. "Maxie," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. "It's not over." I staggered back, the weight of his words crashing down on me. The cult might have been dealt a blow, but the darkness that took my brother was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I knew I had to keep fighting, to protect others from suffering the same fate. The weeks that followed were a blur of police statements, media interviews, and a constant sense of unease. Delaney's trial was a media circus, and the evidence we'd gathered was enough to ensure he would never see the light of day again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough, that the cult's influence ran deeper than we'd uncovered. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar voice whispering in the darkness. "Maxie." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Tom?" His ghostly figure appeared at the foot of my bed, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You have to finish this, Maxie. You have to end it." "How?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. "I don't know how." He stepped closer, his form flickering like a dying flame. "Find the source. Destroy it. Only then will we be free." Before I could ask him anything else, he vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I knew what I had to do, but the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. As I lay back down, a sense of determination washed over me. I would find the source of the cult's power, and I would destroy it. For Tom, for the victims, and for myself. The children of Euphoria would fall, and I would make sure they never rose again. The fight against the children of Euphoria consumed my every waking moment. Delaney's arrest had only scratched the surface. Tom's ghostly warnings haunted me, pushing me to delve deeper, to uncover the true heart of the cult. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how entrenched and widespread their influence was. Lisa was my rock during this time. She stayed by my side, helping me piece together the clues, tracing the cult's roots back to an ancient, obscure religious order that had splintered off and gone underground centuries ago. They believed in attaining divine knowledge through suffering and sacrifice, and their reach extended far beyond what we initially thought. One name kept cropping up: the Shepherd. He was the real leader, the true mastermind behind the children of Euphoria. Delaney was just a pawn, a figurehead to distract from the true power behind the scenes. The Shepherd was said to reside in a remote monastery hidden deep in the mountains, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. We spent weeks planning our approach. This was it, the final stand. We couldn't afford any mistakes. I armed myself with everything I could, mentally and physically preparing for the battle ahead. Lisa managed to get us detailed maps of the area, and we set off on our journey, knowing it could very well be our last. The drive to the mountains was long and arduous, the terrain growing more treacherous with every mile. As we neared the location, a sense of dread settled over us. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the sky seemed perpetually overcast, casting everything in a muted gray light. We parked the car a few miles from the monastery and continued on foot, moving through dense forests and rugged trails. As we approached, the outline of the monastery loomed in the distance, an ancient stone structure, weathered and foreboding. The closer we got, the more I felt Tom's presence, his spirit guiding me. We reached the outer walls under the cover of darkness. The place was heavily guarded, but we managed to sneak in through a hidden passage Lisa had found in the old maps. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers filled with relics and symbols of the cult's twisted beliefs. We moved cautiously, avoiding patrols and surveillance cameras. Finally, we reached a grand hall at the center of the monastery. There, on a raised platform, stood the shepherd, an imposing figure cloaked in black, his face obscured by a hood. He was surrounded by his most devoted followers, their eyes glazed with fervor. They chanted softly, their voices echoing in the vast space. The shepherd raised his hands and the chanting ceased. "Welcome, Max," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I've been expecting you." My blood ran cold. He knew we were coming. "It ends here," I said, stepping forward. "No more children, no more sacrifices." The shepherd chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "You think you can stop us? We are eternal. The children of Euphoria will never die." Lisa and I exchanged a glance, and we moved as one. She provided cover fire, taking out the guards as I charged at the shepherd. He was strong, his movements swift and calculated. We clashed, the fight brutal and intense. He was well trained, anticipating my every move. But I had something he didn't, the spirit of my brother driving me forward. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to knock him off balance and deliver a fatal blow. He fell to the ground, blood pooling around him. The room erupted into chaos. Without their leader, the cult members panicked, some fleeing, others attacking in a frenzy. Lisa and I fought our way out, the air thick with smoke and gunfire. We reached the hidden passage and escaped into the night, the monastery burning behind us. We didn't stop running until we were far away, the glow of the fire a distant memory. We collapsed in exhaustion, the weight of what we'd done sinking in. The shepherd was dead, but the cult's influence would take time to unravel completely. In the days that followed, law enforcement raided the remaining cult hideouts, arresting members and freeing victims. The media was all over the story. The children of Euphoria finally exposed for what they were. It was a victory, but a hollow one. The scars of what we'd seen and done would never fully heal. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a familiar presence. "Maxie," Tom's voice whispered, soft and gentle. I opened my eyes and saw him standing at the foot of my bed, his expression peaceful for the first time. "It's over," I said, my voice trembling. "We did it." He smiled, a bittersweet smile. "Thank you, Maxie. You set me free." Tears streamed down my face as I reached out to him, but he faded away, leaving me alone in the darkness. I knew he was at peace now, but the fight had taken its toll on me. The nightmares, the guilt, the endless battle, it would stay with me forever. But I had a purpose now. I would continue to hunt down the remnants of the cult, to protect the innocent from their evil, for Tom, for the victims, and for myself. The darkness would never win, not as long as I had breath in my body, and so I took up the mantle of a guardian, a relentless force against the shadows. The children of Euphoria might have been defeated, but their legacy of suffering would not be forgotten. I would make sure of that, because I was Max, the dark web hitman, who became a warrior against the darkness, and I would fight until my last breath. I ordered a killer clown from the dark web. He wanted me to play hide and seek. I've always been into weird stuff. I guess that's what led me to the dark web in the first place. I've seen a lot of creepy things online, but I never thought I'd actually order something. It started as a joke. My friends and I were drinking one night, and the topic of the dark web came up. You know, all the creepy stories about red rooms, illegal stuff, and worse. I joked about ordering something insane, like a killer clown. Everyone laughed, and we moved on. But the idea stuck with me. A week later, I was alone in my room, drunk and bored. I started browsing through the dark web, and eventually, I found myself on a site that sold experiences. There was an option to hire a killer clown for a night. It seemed too insane to be real, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it, filled out some basic info, and paid a ridiculous amount of Bitcoin. I didn't expect anything to happen. 2 days later, a package arrived at my door. It was a small, plain box with no return address. Inside was a red clown nose, a note, and a small, cheap-looking mask. The note simply said, "Friday, 10 p.m. Be ready to play hide and seek." I laughed it off, thinking it was a scam. But as Friday approached, I started to feel uneasy. I decided to play along, just in case. At 10 p.m., I put on the mask and the clown nose and waited. My heart was pounding in my chest. Nothing happened for a while, and I was about to call it a night when there was a knock at my door. I hesitated, then opened it. Standing there was a clown. Not a friendly circus clown. This guy was something out of a nightmare. His costume was tattered and dirty, his face paint-smeared and grotesque. He had a sinister grin that sent chills down my spine. "Ready to play?" he asked in a raspy voice. I was too stunned to speak. He pushed past me into my apartment, looking around like he owned the place. "Hide and seek," he said again. "You hide, I seek." I tried to laugh it off. "Okay, man, you got me, good joke." He didn't laugh. Instead, he pulled a large bloody knife from his costume. "Hide," he whispered. "Now." Panic set in. This wasn't a joke. I bolted for my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely lock it. I heard him moving around outside, humming a creepy tune. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. I tried to text my friends, but the messages wouldn't send. It was like I was completely cut off from the world. My mind was racing. I needed to get out, but there was only one door, and the clown was on the other side. I looked around my room, searching for a place to hide. The closet was too obvious. Under the bed? Maybe. I crawled under, trying to steady my breathing. I heard the clown's footsteps approaching. The doorknob rattled, then the door creaked open. "I know you're in here," he sang, in a chilling, sing-song voice. I covered my mouth, trying not to make a sound. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, drawing closer to the bed. I could see his dirty shoes from my hiding spot. He stopped right in front of the bed, and I held my breath. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I could hear him moving around the room, opening drawers, rummaging through my things. Then the room went silent. I waited, listening intently. Had he left? I slowly peeked out from under the bed. The room was empty. I crawled out, trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart was still pounding. I needed to get out of there. I made my way to the door, but as soon as I opened it, the clown was there, grinning from ear to ear. "Found you," he whispered, raising his knife. I screamed and ran back into the room, slamming the door behind me. This time, I shoved a chair under the doorknob. I needed to find another way out. The window. It was my only option. I hurried over and struggled to open it. It was stuck. I used all my strength, and finally, it budged. I was halfway out the window when I felt a hand grab my ankle. I kicked and screamed, but the clown's grip was like iron. He yanked me back into the room, slamming me onto the floor. I looked up into his twisted face, his eyes full of madness. "Now it's my turn to hide," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "And you're going to seek." He brought the knife down, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I screamed in agony, the room spinning around me. Everything went dark. I woke up sometime later, my head pounding, my side throbbing with pain. I was tied to a chair in my living room. The clown was sitting across from me, cleaning his knife. "Round 2, he said with a smile. "You're it." I struggled against the ropes binding me to the chair, but they were tight and unforgiving. My side was burning with pain, and every movement sent sharp jolts through my body. The clown watched me with a twisted smile, clearly enjoying my suffering. "Ready to play?" he asked again, as if this was all just a game to him. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head as if considering my question. "I want to have fun," he said finally. "And you're going to help me." Before I could respond, he stood up and walked over to me. He leaned in close, his breath hot and foul against my face. "I'm going to untie you," he whispered, "and then you're going to run. If you can hide for 1 hour, you win. But if I find you..." He trailed off, the threat clear in his eyes. He cut the ropes with a swift slash of his knife, and I fell to the floor, too weak to stand immediately. He backed away, giving me space. "You have a 5-minute head start," he said, glancing at his watch. "Go." I didn't waste any time. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I needed to find a place to hide, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. I bolted out of the apartment, running down the hallway as fast as I could. My side was still bleeding, and every step was agony, but I couldn't stop. Not if I wanted to survive. I burst through the stairwell door and started climbing. I lived on the 3rd floor, and I figured if I could get to the roof, I might have a chance. I could maybe find a way to signal for help, or at least hide until the hour was up. I reached the top floor, panting and drenched in sweat. The door to the roof was locked, but I kicked it with all my strength, and it finally gave way. The night air was cold and biting, but it felt refreshing against my burning skin. I looked around, trying to find a good hiding spot. The roof was mostly empty, just a few vents and a large water tank. I decided to climb the tank, hoping it would give me a better vantage point. I clambered up, wincing with every movement, and settled behind the tank. From here, I could see most of the roof and the stairwell door. If the clown came through, I would have a few seconds to react. I checked my watch. 4 minutes had passed. 1 more minute until he would start looking for me. I tried to calm my breathing, but my heart was racing. I could still hear his voice in my head, that sing-song taunt. "Ready or not, here I come." The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I kept my eyes on the door, waiting for it to burst open, but nothing happened. Maybe he had given up. Maybe he was still in the apartment, thinking I was hiding there. I was starting to believe I might actually survive this when the door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat. The clown stepped out onto the roof, his knife glinting. In the moonlight, he looked around, his eyes scanning the area. I pressed myself against the tank, praying he wouldn't see me. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the hunt. He checked behind the vents under some old tarps, but he didn't look up. I held my breath, my muscles tense and aching. Just a little longer, I told myself. Just hold on a little longer. But then he stopped, right below me. He looked up, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "There you are," he said softly. I panicked. I jumped down from the tank, landing hard on my injured side. The pain was blinding, but I forced myself to move. I sprinted towards the edge of the roof, hoping to find a fire escape or something. Anything. He was right behind me, his footsteps echoing in the night. I reached the edge and looked down. There was a fire escape, but it was a long drop. I had no choice. I swung myself over the edge and started climbing down as fast as I could. Halfway down, I felt his hand grab my ankle again. He pulled, and I lost my grip, falling the rest of the way. I landed in a heap, pain exploding in my legs. I tried to crawl away, but he was on me in an instant. "Game over," he whispered, raising the knife. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But instead of stabbing me, he slashed my arm, leaving a deep, bloody gash. "You get one more chance," he said, his voice filled with mock pity. "But if I find you again, you're dead." He stood up, leaving me bleeding and broken on the ground. 5 minutes, he called over his shoulder as he walked away. "Better make them count." I struggled to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I had to find a place to hide, somewhere safe, somewhere he wouldn't find me. I stumbled down the alley, my vision blurry from pain and blood loss. There had to be somewhere I could go, somewhere I could survive. I stumbled through the dark alley, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain in my side and arm was almost unbearable, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, he would find me, and this nightmare would end with my death. I had to keep moving, keep looking for a place to hide. I rounded a corner and found myself in a narrow, deserted street. The buildings here were old and decrepit, some of them boarded up and abandoned. I scanned the area, trying to find somewhere I could hide. An old warehouse at the end of the street caught my eye. The door was slightly ajar, and there were no lights inside. It was as good a place as any. I limped towards the warehouse, my vision starting to blur from blood loss. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The interior was dark and musty, filled with old rusting machinery and stacks of wooden crates. I needed to find a place to hide, somewhere deep inside where he wouldn't think to look. I moved deeper into the warehouse, my footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. I found a small office in the back, the door hanging off its hinges. I slipped inside and closed the door as best I could, then crawled under the desk. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was the best I could do. I checked my watch. Only a minute had passed since he gave me my second chance. I had 4 more minutes to wait, and then the hunt would begin again. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat sending waves of pain through my body. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. The terror was overwhelming. I could hear every sound, every creak and groan of the old building. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of him. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I could almost imagine him creeping through the warehouse, his knife ready, that insane grin on his face. Finally, the 5 minutes were up. I held my breath, waiting. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic in my ears. Then I heard it, the sound of the warehouse door creaking open. He was inside. "Ready or not, here I come," he sang, his voice echoing through the empty building. I clenched my fists, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear his footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the warehouse. He was taking his time, enjoying the hunt. Every now and then, I could hear him humming that same creepy tune. He was getting closer. I could hear him moving through the machinery, checking behind crates and inside old lockers. The suspense was unbearable. I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweating. I bit my lip, trying to keep from making any noise. Then he was right outside the office. I could see his shadow through the crack in the door. He paused for a moment, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come inside. But the door creaked open, and he stepped in. "I know you're in here," he said softly, his voice sending chills down my spine. Come out, wherever you are." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to become as small as possible. He was moving around the room, opening drawers, looking under the old furniture. He was close, too close. He stopped in front of the desk. I could see his dirty shoes, inches from my face. He leaned down, and I could see his twisted grin, his eyes wild with excitement. "Found you," he whispered. I panicked. I scrambled out from under the desk, trying to get away. But he was faster. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me back. I screamed, the pain unbearable. He threw me to the ground, his knife glinting in the dim light. "You didn't hide very well," he said, almost sounding disappointed. "But that's okay. We can play again." He brought the knife down, slicing a deep gash across my chest. I screamed in agony, my vision going black for a moment. When I came to, he was standing over me, his face inches from mine. "Last chance," he said, his voice low and menacing. "If I find you again, it's over. Understand?" I nodded, too weak to speak. He stepped back, giving me space. 5 minutes, he said, checking his watch. "Go." I dragged myself to my feet, every movement sending waves of pain through my body. I had to find a better hiding place, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. I staggered out of the office, my vision blurry, my head spinning. I moved deeper into the warehouse, looking for anything that might save me. I found a small hidden trapdoor behind a stack of crates. It was partially open, and I could see a ladder leading down into darkness. It was risky, but I had no other choice. I climbed down the ladder, my hands slipping on the rungs. I reached the bottom and found myself in a small, cramped basement. It was filled with old, broken machinery and stacks of dusty boxes. I crawled into a corner, hiding behind a large, rusting machine. It was dark and suffocating, but it was my best chance. I checked my watch. 2 minutes had passed. 3 more to go. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. I could still hear his voice in my head, that sing-song taunt. "Ready or not, here I come." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I could hear every sound, every creak and groan of the old building. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of him. The silence was deafening. Then I heard it, the sound of the trapdoor creaking open. He was coming. I pressed myself tighter against the cold, damp wall of the basement, my heart racing so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The sound of his footsteps descending the ladder echoed through the small space, each one a chilling reminder that he was getting closer. I tried to steady my breathing, to become invisible in the shadows. He landed on the basement floor with a thud, his heavy breathing filling the silence. "You can't hide forever," he called out, his voice carrying that same unsettling sing-song tone. "I'll find you." I watched from my hiding spot behind the rusted machine as he moved through the basement, his eyes scanning every dark corner. The light from the open trapdoor above cast eerie shadows, distorting his already grotesque appearance. He seemed to be enjoying this, savoring every moment of my terror. He started knocking over boxes and kicking at old machinery, creating a cacophony of noise. Each crash and bang made me flinch, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I could feel the blood seeping through my clothes, my body growing weaker with every passing second. He was methodical, checking every possible hiding place. I knew it was only a matter of time before he found me. I needed to think of something, a way to escape or defend myself. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. There was nothing but dust and decay. He was getting closer, only a few feet away now. I could see the gleam of his knife as he moved. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. Then I saw it. A long, rusty pipe lying on the ground near my feet. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I waited until he was almost on top of me, his back turned as he checked behind another stack of boxes. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I lunged for the pipe and swung it with all my might. It connected with the back of his head with a sickening thud. He staggered forward, letting out a grunt of pain. I didn't wait to see if he was down for good. I scrambled to my feet and made a run for the ladder. My vision was blurry, my limbs heavy, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I reached the ladder and started to climb, my hands slipping on the rungs slick with sweat and blood. I was halfway up when I felt a hand grab my ankle, yanking me down. I kicked out blindly, hitting him in the face. He let go and I continued climbing, desperate to reach the top. I could hear him climbing after me, his breaths ragged and furious. I reached the trapdoor and pulled myself up, collapsing onto the warehouse floor. I kicked the ladder away, sending it crashing to the ground below. But I knew that wouldn't stop him for long. I needed to find a way to block the trapdoor, to buy myself some time. I looked around frantically and spotted a large metal cabinet. I pushed it over the trapdoor, the effort nearly making me black out. I could hear him pounding on the door from below, shouting obscenities and threats. The cabinet wouldn't hold forever, but it was all I had. I stumbled towards the exit, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. I needed to get out of here, to find help. But my legs gave out, and I fell to the ground, the world spinning around me. I could feel the darkness closing in, my strength fading. Then I heard voices, distant at first, but growing closer. Someone was coming. I tried to call out, but my voice was barely a whisper. I could see flashlights cutting through the darkness, and I prayed they would find me in time. The pounding on the trapdoor grew louder, more frantic. I could hear the metal cabinet scraping against the floor as he tried to push it aside. I closed my eyes, too exhausted to move. This was it. Either the people with the flashlights would find me, or he would. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of the trapdoor crashing open and a pair of strong hands lifting me off the ground. I heard voices shouting, but the words were lost in the haze of pain and darkness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The room was bright and sterile, the steady beep of monitors the only sound. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in my side stopped me. A nurse appeared at my side, gently pushing me back down. "Take it easy," she said softly. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt strange, almost foreign. The memories of that night came flooding back, and I shuddered. "The clown," I whispered, my voice weak. The nurse's face grew serious. "The police found him. He's in custody. You're going to be okay." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. It was finally over. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. Recovery was slow. The physical wounds began to heal, but the psychological scars were another story. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his twisted grin, heard his sing-song taunts. The hospital staff was kind, and they assured me that the clown was securely locked away, but it didn't help. The fear had burrowed deep into my soul. After a few weeks, I was discharged and sent home. My apartment felt like a crime scene. Bloodstains still marked the floor where he had attacked me. The landlord had tried to clean up, but the memories lingered in every corner. I decided to move, finding a small, nondescript apartment across town. The police had taken my statement multiple times, and the detective on the case, Detective Harris, kept in touch regularly. They were trying to piece together how the clown had been hired and what his motives were. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't find much. The dark web is a shadowy place, and transactions like mine are almost impossible to trace. I tried to return to normal life, but every shadow, every unexpected noise sent me into a panic. I barely slept, plagued by nightmares. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to work through the trauma, but it was a slow process. One night, about a month after the attack, I was in bed trying to sleep. The room was dark, and the silence was almost oppressive. I had finally started to drift off when I heard a noise, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. My heart began to race. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. "Ready or not, here I come." I shot up in bed, my blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. He was in jail. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. The operator's voice was calm, but I could barely get the words out. "He's here," I whispered. "The clown. He's here." "Sir, remain calm. Help is on the way," the operator assured me. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crept through the apartment, my senses on high alert. I checked every room, every closet, but there was no sign of him. The police arrived within minutes, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no trace of the clown. They assured me it was probably just a bad dream, a flashback, but I knew what I had heard. I wasn't losing my mind. Detective Harris visited the next day, and I told him everything. He promised to increase patrols around my building and look into the matter further. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe it had been a hallucination after all. But the feeling of being watched never went away. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows, but it didn't help. One night, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Let's play again." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I opened the email and my blood ran cold. "Miss me? I'm coming for you. Better hide." I immediately forwarded the email to Detective Harris and called him. He tried to reassure me, but I could hear the concern in his voice. They traced the email, but it led to a dead end. Another dark web transaction, untraceable. I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment. I packed a bag and checked into a hotel, trying to stay one step ahead. But the emails kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. He described watching me, knowing where I was, what I was doing. The police were stumped. It was like he was a ghost, always one step ahead, One night, while I was staying in yet another hotel, there was a knock at the door. I checked the peephole, my heart in my throat. It was Detective Harris. I opened the door, relief flooding through me. "We got him," he said, a smile on his face. "He's been sending the emails from a remote location. We've got him in custody." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you," I whispered, tears in my eyes. He nodded. "Get some rest. You're safe now." But as I closed the door, I noticed something odd. Detective Harris had a smudge of white makeup on his collar. My heart skipped a beat. I locked the door and backed away, my mind racing. My phone buzzed. Another email. I opened it with trembling hands. "Nice try. Ready or not, here I come." I dropped the phone, my blood turning to ice. The game wasn't over. It would never be over. He would always find me, always be one step ahead, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that there was no escape. The nightmare would never end.